The politicians and the business leaders who aren't speaking clearly either don't understand or, worse, don't want the people who are listening to understand.
G'day and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast demystifying the big economic debates in Australia and putting them in plain English. I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Australia Institute, and this week we're talking to Dr. Richard Dennis about his new book, Econobabble.
One for Mum, one for Dad, one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be in Australia.
Dead, buried, cremated.
Australia's basically done for. We'll just end up being a third-rate economy. A banana republic.
Just follow the money.
In this week's special episode, I'm talking to Richard about his new book, Econobabble. Now, I've read the whole thing from cover to cover, and I can honestly say I did not expect to laugh out loud while reading a book about economics. Tell me, what is Econobabble?
Econobabble is when people, usually politicians and business leaders, use economic jargon instead of plain English to try and tell people what the problem is or what a solution is or what we need to do as a country. So rather than speaking clearly and plainly, Econobabble is powerful people using a complicated language to conceal rather than reveal. Once upon a time, the Catholic Church would often preach in Latin to working class audiences. The purpose of preaching in Latin wasn't to persuade the audience, it was to silence them. You can't question what you don't understand. So I don't have any doubt that when business leaders prattle on about competitiveness and labour force productivity and what's happened to the labour force participation rate, they know that most people listening have no idea what they're talking about.
So what does Econobabble sound like?
A significant proportion of the recurrent spending reductions were redirected in increased capital infrastructure investment to strengthen growth and over time increase our revenue generating capacity.
Obviously there are concerns that there will be quite a bit of capital flow dislocation as a result of that decision.
In one of my favourite bits in Econobabble, Richard talks about how commentators, politicians and business leaders warn of invoking the wrath of the markets, talking about them almost like they're vengeful Roman gods. In his essay of Clowns and Treasurers for The Monthly, Richard points out markets don't have feelings. Rich people have feelings.
The markets will be angry. The markets will judge us. We hear politicians all the time, and again, the business leaders saying, unless we take our medicine, unless we do things we don't want to do, the markets will be angry, and nobody wants an angry market. The market doesn't think anything. The market doesn't want anything. The market isn't angry about anything. The market is a place where buyers and sellers come together. So when you hear politicians say the markets will be angry, what they probably meant to say was some rich people who own $1 billion worth of shares will be angry. And
that's quite different.
It is quite different, isn't it? And they may well be angry, and they might even be rightly angry. But if you heard that after the government proposed to make rich people who own a lot of shares pay more tax, rich people who owned a lot of shares were angry, that's probably easier to both predict and interpret than markets reacted angrily today to government announcements that it might crack down on tax concessions for capital gain. One's easy to understand, one no one understands.
So markets don't have feelings?
Markets don't have feelings. Markets don't want anything, they don't love anything, they don't need anything, they don't fear anything, they don't want anything for Christmas. They're just a place where buyers and sellers come together. And buyers have feelings, sellers have feelings.
If you're like me and you listen to the radio news and watch the TV news most nights, the last few minutes is always the finance section. In Econobabble, Richard talks about how this section is used to exclude ordinary people from the conversation about the economy. It contains a lot of jargon that journalists rarely explain in the way that they would do when talking about other topics like science or medicine.
Who knows what the Hang Seng Index is? Who really knows what's in the Nikkei Dow? The handful of people who do are not tuning in to the 5 o'clock news to find out how their share portfolio went today. So you're not alone in wondering what it's doing there. And I think it's a really important question, because commercial news, ABC News, they understand their audience. They understand that none of their audience understands this. What's it doing there? It's telling us all that important stuff we don't understand is happening in the world, and smarter people than you are worried about it. So stay in your box, keep your head down. And if you're wondering simple things like, what if we made rich people pay more tax and spent more on health? Well, the Hung Seng's there to remind you, what the hell would you know?
You've got heaps of examples of Econobabble throughout the book, but there's a few kinds of things that cropped up again and again that you hear quite often in the debate. So the idea that when an economist talks about unemployment, it's very different to what an average person would think you mean by unemployment. Or another one that stuck out at me was like, when is it a good time to raise wages? It's always a good time to cut them, it seems, but
well, according to the markets, it's always a good time to cut wages. We don't say according to employers. We don't say according to people who own shares. The markets think it's always a good time to cut wages. Yeah, look, you're right. Economists and Econobabble, there's two different kinds of it, I suppose. There's the jargon that no one understands, and then there's the plain English words like unemployment that we've actually taken upon ourselves to redefine in a very technical way. So most people think unemployment means, for example, the number of people on the dole. Well, they're wrong. Economists define unemployment entirely differently than that. We think someone is unemployed well, let's go back a step. We think someone is employed if they work for more than 1 hour a week. And if you work for more than 1 hour a week and you're employed, then by definition you couldn't be unemployed. So for an economist, if you're working 2 hours a week and relying heavily on unemployment benefits, you're not unemployed. And when we talk about the unemployment rate going down, we're not talking about people like you. So yeah, it's a very powerful thing to take plain English words and then redefine them and insert them back into a debate, because it's even more undermining of public debate, because people think they know exactly what you're talking about, but we're tricking them. It's like the little asterisk at the top of a marketing claim, may or may not really contain fruit.
So Scott Morrison has appeared at the Press Club recently. Are there any traces of Econobabble in what he had to say?
Oh, traces. if you had an allergy to Econobabble, I think that speech would have put you into anaphylactic shock.
Please welcome Scott Morrison. But of course, we've had to deal with the issues of nominal GDP. We've had to deal with the flattening of those forecasts as time has come in, and you've seen that happen in the various statements going back to PFO as that line has continued to lean over.
Look, sadly, it really was full of it, and that's a real problem for the Treasurer, for the government, because if they really want to bring people into a debate about the problems they see with our economy and the solutions they want to implement, it's their job to persuade people of that.
But Richard, they want to have an honest tax reform debate.
Exactly, and they can't have one because they won't speak in plain English to people. So the Treasurer had a great opportunity at the Press Club to do exactly that, to spell out in plain English what the broad principles were, to spell out in plain English what the problems that they anticipated were. But instead, we got a fascinating analysis of how the convergence of nominal GDP and real GDP was really putting pressure on their efforts of fiscal consolidation.
So if you're like me, you're a non-economist, but sometimes you suspect that people are feeding you bullshit, what's the best way to tackle Econobabble?
Look, the best way is to directly challenge the person saying it. Say, look, that sounds like it might be important. Could you say it again in English? In the same way that, if your child was telling you what happened at school and you didn't understand, he'd say, this sounds important. Tell me what happened there. So I don't think it has to be provocative or rude to ask that question. It's only if people are genuinely trying to hide something that they should be concerned. So, look, step one is just to ask the person to say it again. And if they won't or they can't make themselves clear, then I think that's a very important warning to the listener. Either this person doesn't have the expertise I thought they did, or they're deliberately trying to keep something from me. And that should make us sceptical. And similarly, I suppose, big picture, the big lesson that I'd say that economics does teach us is there is no magic pudding. And that's, that's I guess the bullshit detector. Most people can smell someone selling a magic pudding. They might not be able to articulate why, they might not be able to see the particular flaw in an argument, but they can usually figure out that if we cut taxes for rich people and spend a lot less money on health, it might not really help poor people. Well, you don't need an economics degree to say, I don't think that sounds very persuasive. It's actually up to the expert to persuade you that that's plausible.
And that's been episode 4 of Follow the Money, brought to you by the Australia Institute. You can subscribe on iTunes or find previous episodes at tai.org.au. Econobabble is available from redbackquarterly.com.au, and you can find it on Amazon and in all good bookshops. Follow Richard on Twitter at rdns_tai. Follow me at Ebony_Bennett, and follow the Australia Institute at the Oz Institute with an AUS. Thanks for listening.